Hey, it's Neil. It's April 19th and Friday, and this video is on the Cloudflare Workers that we wrap our Google Sites with for walkinthewoods.llc. I love Google Sites for its simplicity and its limitations, but some of those limitations also cause problems, particularly with search indexing. And we also want to be able to augment all of our pages with scripts and not have those scripts be embedded within sandboxed iframes, because then we can't use those scripts. And that by doing that, we'll be able to embed actual applications into our website and still use Google Sites for all the CMS purposes. So here's the site as it exists today, and the very first thing you'll notice is if you go to news, the link at the bottom, if you can see that, is AI/news, but then what it ends up redirecting to is our root. And unfortunately, you cannot have Google Sites hosted on the naked domain. That is just walkinthewoods.llc. We have to put www or some other subdomain in front of it. So again, the root, the apex, the naked domain, you can't host Google Sites on that, and that's an okay limitation. I don't have a problem with having www, and we have a redirect from the apex down into www anyway, and most users won't ever even see that. But then having the other limitation where the home page also duplicates what the root says causes the Google search indexing to ignore one or both, because you need to have one and you need to be a canonical specification. If you have two, there's a tag that you put in the document, and we can't put those meta tags in the document with Google Sites. So for these limitations, I started getting a little antsy, thinking, oh my god, I'm going to have to move to a real CMS. But that also means opening up a whole can of worms of options. It's great to have all those options, but this early in the development and probably later on, I don't want to have to be modifying options, styles, configuring components. What's great about Google Sites right now is there really aren't any options, and it's a dead simple CMS, so I can pretty much bring in anyone to modify the stuff in there. And the URLs it creates are quite pleasant. They're very simple. And I kind of mentioned that here. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is Wrangler and local development of the Cloudflare worker that I use to do all of that magic. One of those pieces of magic, and there's also performance issues with Google Sites that Google doesn't like, and by wrapping this in a Cloudflare worker, we'll be able to fix those, tweak them at the end, and if Google Sites ever fixes those on their end, then we can just remove that code. So it's kind of like we're bootstrapping Google Sites towards something better, and I really hope Google doesn't deprecate their current Google Sites like they did with Classic. But we can see, if I try to run the re-render function, we see it there, and that's because my worker right now is appending that into the body. So we're going to take a look at that. And let me put this in the browser so you can see. All right, so here's the project, the SERPy project, and we have the worker open. The worker itself is here, worker.js, just as before, but we've created a Wrangler project. Now, if you don't have Wrangler, you can install it with npm install Wrangler. If you're an npm guy, you'll already know this. And I just do G so that I can use it everywhere. But if you install it locally, that's fine. The node modules folder in this little project will not be uploaded into GitHub. We're not going to store all the node modules or the temporary Wrangler files. We're just going to be storing the source and the package information. So once you have that, you should be able to just run the worker locally. And it's as simple as npx wrangler dev. Now we're running it on localhost, and then I can go view the web preview version of this, which again, since we're using Cloud Shell, is going to go through their web preview proxy. So it's using HTTPS. And you can see in the debug console any console logs that I write. And this can be really useful. You can set breakpoints too. One thing about the breakpoints, a caveat that I'll mention, is when you use await, asynchronous await, if you put a breakpoint after this and you try to step, or not even a breakpoint, if you try to step over this, it will just end. And that's because the way internally it breaks up functions to handle await, when you step over, you're really just going, okay, I got the promise and I can leave now. So if you want to get from here to here, you need to set a breakpoint and just F5 it, and it'll pop back in when the thread comes back to it. So a couple of things I wanted to cover really quick with the worker. We really don't want to spend too much time in the worker because Cloudflare has a very generous free tier, but the more processing time you spend in a worker, and if your site gets very popular, then it's going to start to cost you more and more money, and that can be exponential, right? If you're doing a lot of nonsense work in the worker, as you can imagine, Cloudflare is not going to pay for that. You're going to pay for that. So if it's nonsense work, as in we don't really want to modify it, then we just let it go through. So we do a very quick check. When the worker gets the request, it hasn't fulfilled this request. It hasn't gone out and gotten that data yet. So we can check that URL very quickly, make sure that we're going to the HTTPS version of the site. Walk in the Woods LLC is our source. And even when this runs as a proxy on Cloudflare to that host record, we can do a fetch to that host record, and because it's running in the worker environment on Cloudflare, it will get the underlying server, so Google Sites. Otherwise, you run into the problem where if I want to grab this, I'd have to go to GHS Google hosted I think it's ghs.googlehosted.com and do a fetch on that. But that uses SNI, server name indication, and there's no way that I know of using fetch to have the TCP connection switch that certificate request from ghsgooglehosted.com to your hosted name, www.walkinthewoods.llc. So what you end up happening is having an SSL error occur, which can be very confusing because the fetch completes and Cloudflare will give you this page that says like I did 1 and 2 but I couldn't do 3. And if you do a curl, some weird stuff shows up too. And I'll probably make a video just on SNI alone because the errors can be very confusing. It's not like cores where there's a zillion different kinds of errors. There's really just one kind of error, but it's obtuse. Anyway, so the worker can directly request what we want underneath, and this is just specifying the URL that we're going to get. But we check to see, okay, if this is the home page of Google Sites, we really don't want to keep that. So we're going to redirect from there and say that's not here, that's there. And that way Google search index will presumably go, it's only in one place. We could do some fancier stuff, as we'll see a little later on. The other thing we'll check is if it's not a get, say it's a head or a post or a put, or it has query parameters, or there's any kind of file extension, then we'll just run the request through as is. So we did change the protocol and we changed the host name, but all the rest of the stuff in the request remains the same, and we'll just pass that through, and then Cloudflare's worker service will end up fetching the data and just processing the response as normal. So this is a very, very quick way to pass through, and you can see this just by if we did any kind of query string here, and you look, we'll see, okay, it's just doing a pass through. And I'm actually curious, it looks, view log impressions, okay, yep. What is going on here? Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, here we go. Was I just not? Oh, right. I'm not seeing all the debug output there, but in the actual Not in the debugger. Oh, did I stop debugging? I did. Oh, debugging. Yeah, in order to debug, not even debugging, my big fat head is in the way. You have to start the server from the terminal. You can't just execute it from VS Code right now. And there's probably a way to set up a task so it does both these things. But once you have the server running, you hit debug, and it's going to attach to the Wrangler process on the debug port. And so now we're debugging. So if we go here, try this again, we're going to see all of that stuff. What's really nice about debugging too is you can set breakpoints. You can also evaluate expressions, and any console logs end up showing up. When you're on production, you're not going to see any of these console logs, which makes it a little, you want to mess with it locally right before you put it on production. All right, so we've got our worker, and we want to see what happens when we do get a request that we want to modify. So this means in our case, we're going to a path that has no query string, and it's going to return HTML. And from that HTML, we're going to want to add our little script into the footer here. And I just take the MVP script from Surfy because right now I'm really just testing it. And I need to remove this. This is so that I'm trying to, well, I'll mention that in a second. And there's this funny little thing in here with content encoding, and that's because running locally, when I would do the fetch, sometimes it would just come back with a bunch of nasty looking stuff, question marks. The problem with that is you're trying to UTF-8 decode something that's not UTF-8, and you end up with a bunch of question mark characters. And it turned out that the response encoding was Brotli. It was set to BR. And I'd never actually seen that. I knew about gzip, but BR. And fetch natively doesn't try to decode things on its own. That's kind of up to you. It will give you the body, and then you can decode it. But so far as I know, Cloudflare Workers don't have any kind of module installed for Brotli decoding. And rather than trying to figure that stuff out, all I do there is if content encoding comes back with anything, then I just do the fetch with completely different headers. See, because the original request has an accept encoding of Brotli, gzip, what have you, and that ends up causing Cloudflare to go, oh, you can use Brotli, we'll give you Brotli. And rather than getting really complicated here, I'm just going to do a plain get on that URL and then reprocess it. So a little bit of a hack there, but thankfully on production, when you're doing the fetch from the source, Google Sites doesn't return Brotli. That's kind of a Cloudflare thing. So this actually doesn't get hit on production. It only gets hit on dev. So that was one of those things where I was running on dev and it wasn't working even though production was. Very confusing. And just like you would normally with fetch, this is NPM if you're familiar with it, or Node.js, you just await, get the response text, and then, pardon me, you can process it as is and then create a new response object with the HTML you want and specify exactly the headers that you want. So in this case, we're just coming back with text HTML. And this works. And it's pretty cool. So you can see it working just by going to any of these pages. And the funny thing is, so I'm putting hello in the document just so I could see that Markdown is working, but the way Google Sites UI, you don't want to mess with their HTML too much, and that's kind of what another one of those limitations that I like is it's hard to modify Google Sites. I want it to be easy to create stuff in there, but hard to programmatically modify, so you can't have some runaway script go blast everything. I just want to change a few things here and there. But I did want to be able to process Markdown because with LLMs, the way they're set up now, they're very Markdown friendly because they've been trained on GitHub. And so what I did is I downloaded the marked ESM module and I just put that into the source directory, and then I can import it, just like this. So if you look at the marked documentation, this is how it tells you to import it. And then from there, I already deleted it, didn't know it's right there. From there, you can just call marked on a string and it will return HTML. And you can see that this worked when you look at, actually let's view the source, that's an easier way to do it. Yeah, it's right there. I mean, how cool is that? So what I can do with this is I can find elements in the page, assuming they have some kind of placeholder that I can lock onto, and I can say if I put markdown in that element, I can replace that element with the actual HTML. We'll see how that goes. I don't want to spend too much time on that sort of thing, but it is kind of cool that inside the worker you can process markdown. And speaking of workers, there's a lot of stuff. They have this thing called AI bindings, but they allow you to use a fair amount of AI models currently, like Llama, just the 7 billion parameter one, not the 70. And it's not free, but it's pretty simple to use within the worker. So you can imagine augmenting your pages automatically using AI, using workers, and then it's just too many options. Again, I'm trying to reduce options, not add options, but workers allows me anything that Google Sites has limitation on. Workers allows me to break that limitation and still continue using Google Sites, which is good just for saving the content. Lastly, deployment. Once you have all this done, and by the way, if you haven't logged in the first time, you need to run like Wrangler login. It's probably going to tell you. Once you've gotten it done, you can write npx Wrangler deploy, or I think just Wrangler deploy. And assuming that you're logged in to Cloudflare, then that will create a new deployment in Cloudflare and activate it at the same time. And it's way faster than things like Cloud Run. So whereas we have to wait 2 or 3 minutes for Cloud Run to deploy, this thing takes a matter of seconds. So I'm happy with choosing Go as our server language, but after using workers, and I'm not saying that Go or JavaScript one is better than the other, but the speed of dealing with workers on Cloudflare and the pricing, it gives me a little bit of buyer's remorse, because I think, boy, if I had done this full Cloudflare, it would be really fast and really cheap. But we've made a commitment to use Go on the server, and so we're going to keep pushing that. If Cloudflare Workers support Go, currently you can compile using WebAssembly for Cloudflare Workers. And they probably do through that kind of compilation, then we'll have that possibility. But I don't want to think about optimizations and complications right now. Okay, so if I look at production, we'll see, or my special re-render function is there. That's great. And if we view the page source, I love these little things at the top now you can wrap. We see the h1 hello is there as well. And so I'm just going to show why I've removed hello, and I'm going to redeploy. And that's it. So now we see the script has been added, but that little hello, it's now missing. We fixed that, and we can check in our stuff as normal. All right, so that's Wrangler, Workers, and the www.walkinthewoods.llc page, and how we're developing on that using Google Sites as the CMS. CMS, yeah, content management system. All right, ciao. Have a good weekend.